It's really hard to talk about the themes of this time of year, of incarnation and the birth of the Christ child and Christmas, given everything that's happening. Be it the fictitious war on Christmas, where people are trying to weaponize the very idea of Christmas, to just the ongoing genocides and fights that are happening throughout the world. The message of God entering the world through the vulnerability of a child, it's one that a lot of us really don't want to hear. We want a God of strength, a God of might, a Zeus that's going to stand on Mount Olympus and rain lightning bolts down on our enemies. But the God that we meet in these stories is one who comes as a baby, who has to flee and run and hide because terrible things are being done to end his ministry before it ever starts. The gospel is a message of peace. We talk about Jesus as the Prince of Peace, and yet 2,000 years later, there's still so much violence in the world. And so much of that violence is done in his name. So today, we want to talk about the gospel, that story that we have of mutual indwelling that arises through the Nativity and through these 12 days of Christmas, and see how it lives in a world ruled by the sword as we walk together down creation's paths. Hello, everyone. My name is Charlie. I am a Christopagan druid and priest of Bridget.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brian. I'm a Christopagan druid and sous chef to the Dog Dog.
Today, we're going to be really looking at what happens when this fragile idea of God enters the world, and this beautiful notion of mutual indwelling with that God and our own mutual care and concern for one another meets the systems of control that are already around us. But before we get into all that, I would just like to let you know, thank you for being here. We all arrive at these stories at different times from different places with many different interpretations in our heads. We may be getting here without ever having heard them before or having a very particular reading placed on us. That's okay. We're here to discuss them, both in the world around us with those that are in our lives, us here with you now on this podcast, and with each other in the comments, both here and on CreationsPaths. If you'd like to be a part of these discussions, don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, wherever you're listening to this or watching it right now. It really does help us out a lot and helps us to build this community where we can discuss these things and find deeper wisdom within them. All right, let's just get into it, shall we? Throughout the Gospel of Matthew, we have a theme that is often taken out of context running through it. It's 3 separate passages that happen at 3 separate times, but we actually see this play out in the gospel story itself, in the very nativity story that we were working through up through Advent and through the Christmas season, which are the 12 days, including Christmas and just following. And that is this idea that Jesus did not come into the world to bring peace, but a sword. That Jesus' arrival would set father against son and mother against daughter and nation against nation. We have Jesus saying that from the time of John, who was born 3 months before him, until now, the kingdom has suffered violence, and the violent are trying to take it, to rob it, to plunder it. And at the very end of the story, Jesus tells us, Peter, lay down your sword, for the one who takes up the sword or lives by the sword will die by it. That message runs throughout the Gospel of Matthew and paints this very coherent picture that we can see in the nativity story and the stories that surround it. Jesus came into the world and is instantly divisive, not because he did or said anything, but because the culture that he arrived in said that women must be married before they get pregnant. Because the culture he lived in said, if you find that your wife is pregnant with a child that is not yours, you should cast her out, divorce her, and she should be stoned and killed. And so Joseph has to struggle with that in himself. You see, the sword is there, but Mary and Joseph make peace with each other. They don't go to war. Joseph does not take up the sword. When they arrive in Bethlehem, they find a place for the child to be born. They don't push their way in. When they are told that Herod is sending his troops into the city and they must flee, again, Joseph doesn't take up the sword. Mary doesn't take up the sword. They flee into Egypt to get away from the oppression that's coming. The stories around this show this nonviolent resistance, this mutual care. They must take care of one another. Because the great mystery of Christmas is that God chose to be born a babe, a helpless, fragile babe. And in the mystery that we have here, now a mystery is like a Zen koan. It's something that's meant to be chewed on and thought about, not answered, not completely understood and made into something solid. It's something you enter into mystery. The mystery here, Mary gives birth to her creator. And so Mary becomes the mother of God. And that God who created Mary is now a child, fragile, and in need of her for nurturing and support. That is the gospel of mutual indwelling. This is panentheism at its best. God is in all things and all things are in God, and we depend one on another. And deep down within us, this awakens the sense of caring for one another. We need to take care of the Christ child, not just within me, not just within my family, but in my community and in circles wider out. But it doesn't bring peace because that mutual care is at odds with the world and the way it likes to work in hierarchies where some people are greater and better than others, which is why Herod sends the troops. It wants to work in this way where power is dictated, not earned, not exercised for the well-being of everyone, but only for the few. It's a powerful story. It's a powerful message. And it's one that I don't think a lot of people really spend enough time thinking about.
Most of the time when I encounter this verse, in my own reading through, I just kind of glossed over it because I was like, wow, seems so violent and counter to the rest of the message. So I just kind of put it aside. I will masticate upon this later, chew on it. The only other times I encountered it is generally when people are like, we're warriors for Christ. And they would use such violent rhetoric because they're like, yeah, they'll sit there and quote, I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. And they're like, yeah, we're going to take up the sword. I always found it odd because I'm like, yeah, but when Jesus told them to actually get the sword and bring this a sword to the Garden of Gethsemane, this is obviously not saying that we're supposed to take up a sword. Trying to understand and reconcile this was a struggle for quite some time. When you look at the whole story at this Christmas time, in this Christmas season, this child being born, it isn't that the child came into the world with a sword and started hacking people down, but the very arrival of that child drove Herod to dispatch his troops and slaughter the innocents. And suddenly it was like all of Christmas season started to fit and make more sense. Like, why are we spending time? We're in this joyful Jesus being born into the world moment. Why are we spending time with the slaughter of the innocents other than the fact that this kind of is part of the story? Once again, it was an oddity that didn't fit, didn't register. It's inconsistent at first. But recognizing that this mutual indwelling is a paradigm shift and that the world, the authorities, the powers and principalities.
This is one of the few times that we can actually use that phrase. It's so overused of a paradigm shift, but this really is a paradigm shift. It's asking us to rethink how we think about everything.
Yeah, I think back to, we did this short talking about, hey guys, after you've emptied yourself, you could fill yourself back up, fill it with something good instead of leaving it open where you could be brainwashed and have somebody else come along and give you this, here's a political message you should then obey and dispatch it obediently. And I laughed because I was remembering like when it got disliked by some people, and I'm just like, this is that all over again. I was simply saying, hey, look, you could live a better life. And somebody like getting all up in my face going, no, I want to be enslaved and brainwashed. I don't want to have to think. And them reacting violently to what seemed like such a simple, innocent message of like, hey, we could choose life in easy mode. We don't have to keep playing it in hard mode, to make a game reference.
I recently heard what was ostensibly a Christmas sermon by a pastor who, while talking about the gospel and the coming of Jesus, took this phrase, right? But why did Jesus come? Because he went right from the gospel to, well, why did Jesus come? Well, Jesus tells us, I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. And then he jumps in a very interesting way to the cleansing of the temple. See, there's Jesus picking up the sword. First of all, just to be pedantic about this, he didn't pick up a sword. He picked up a flail, which is different. And let's be honest, why would a flail have been in the temple precinct? It probably wasn't a flail like you think of as a means of war. This was probably a whip for corralling animals. This would have been something that would have made a loud crack to scare them, but probably not something designed to hit them so that you could get the sheep and everything where they needed to be. Because remember, he's in a market where they're buying the animals for sacrifice in the temple, right? So this probably was more of a shepherd's device, but I digress, right? This one act is not an act of war. Now, those in the temple saw it that way. What does Jesus say in this moment? My temple should be a house of prayer, but you have made it into a den of thieves. Get out.
Even in that context, it's not even a digression, because in seeing that this is not a flail as a weapon of war, but flail as a means of corralling unruly animals, it turns all the occupants of the temple who are acting as unruly animals into that context, that framework. And then you realize, yeah, he's not like flipping tables and beating people bloody. He's making a commotion to steer or shepherd the unruly animals from where they're not supposed to be to where they need to be.
Because I assure you, the Romans were not allowing the Jews in the temple to sell weapons.
So especially at this point in time, because they even say the Romans are on heightened alert. They're at red level alert because they're expecting revolution. They're expecting some kind of military terrorist attack type thing. They're expecting violence to happen. So they're already on red alert. Weapons are already being checked. This isn't an open carry state. Rome will not allow that. So yeah, it wouldn't be a flail as in a weapon of war.
And so it is a way for him to use these stories to justify his own desire to exercise coercion and threat onto others. Because Jesus, in the cleansing of the temple, trying to spook the animals to get them where they need to go. The story, and this is one of those places where I think the story is very interesting, does not say that he hit people. The story doesn't say that he was attacking people. It says that he grabbed a flail and flipped over some tables. He is acting on his own. What they're missing in this is the actual message that goes through. Because there is a through line here. Like I said, this image of the sword appears 3 times in the Gospel of Matthew. Matthew is making a point. He's bringing it back up. It is a motif that is present in the text. Jesus says, I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. This is after he has told people, oh, yeah, if somebody slaps you, turn the other cheek. If somebody conscripts you to carry their stuff, go an extra mile. If someone tells you, give me your coat, give them your cloak too. This is not a Jesus that is advocating for the violent overthrow of anything. But again, some people don't like reading the red letters.
And then the third time when it comes up is that in the Garden of Gethsemane there, Matthew 26:52, those who take the sword will perish by the sword. It comes up again. And once again, like when you start looking at it as this through line, it's like, oh, wait, so this doesn't mean that we're supposed to be picking up a sword and violently bringing the kingdom of God around like some Roman soldier.
Yeah, the message here in the gospel is very clear. The gospel itself makes people uncomfortable. So they're going to try to corral and control it. It brings a sword. They are trying to take it by force. These people that he's talking about here are literally giving cumin and dill and saying, I have taken care of the poor. Yeah, who lives off of seeds and spices? You gotta have something to put the seeds and spices on, or it's not actually sustenance. The people that he's talking about and talking to in the Gospel of Matthew are those who have taken power themselves, and they don't want to let it go. The kingdom is not of this world, Jesus keeps telling us. We are to reject the world, Jesus keeps telling us. He's not telling us to reject this place that we're in, the bodies that we're in. He's telling us to reject the system that is controlling the world. that world has to go away. It has to pass away so that a new heaven and a new earth can come in. That's the message that we have here. And it is through this nonviolent passive resistance that allows people to see this mutual indwelling and live in this place of mutual care.
Yeah, once you take that shift into seeing it as this is a new system and the conflict, it arises just by its own incarnation in the world, because the other systems of power, of authority, of control utilize violence. And it's something that we are trained from the moment we start learning. We're taught to follow these systems, to be obedient to these systems of the capitalism system that we live in, especially here in the States, the system of governance and things. And it's just fascinating that, once you tell people, wait, if you were to shift your mindset out of a capitalistic mindset, and we're not saying abandoning money or commerce, we're saying where few individuals get to own the production of labor, the capital. They get to own that and profit from it, and everybody else is given pittance and pushed into a means of economic slavery where you have to work to eat and have shelter. And if you don't work, you starve and die, or die from the elements, or some combination thereof. That is a form of violence.
And just a quick side note, real quick, I can already hear somebody going to the comments to type it. Well, Paul said, if you don't work, you shouldn't eat. He's talking about the communal meal that was the church service. If you're not doing the work, you don't eat. Read the passage again in context.
Yeah,
not talking about like feeding poor and hungry people.
Also, that one often pops up with hypocrisy. Oftentimes it's somebody who's going, the community's supposed to send me money so that I don't have to work, but everybody else has to work to send me money, or something like that. It's like, yes, shepherding a community is work, and that's doing the work too. But there's many different ways in which that, and once again, this is part of that conflict of the shifting from existing in the current system to seeing that there's a better system. Because that is the old system rising up in violence, even in that instance and in that story where, a preacher's like, hey, you got to do the work or you don't get to eat. Well, no, work manifests so many different ways, because you can also bring up the Marthas, where Mary was sitting at the master's feet learning, and Martha was running around working in the kitchen. They were both working. One was working as a student. One was working as a domestic worker, I guess you could say, or a chef,
Caretaker.
Caretaker. There you go, caretaker work. But it manifests in many different ways. And to put one over the other is once again, it's a false hierarchy. Even Jesus chastises in that moment. There wasn't, this work was better than that work, or you shouldn't be doing this work. It was, don't put one over the other. Both work.
So what we have to be careful of in all of this is that we don't re-import any of those means of coercion and violence into the movements that we are a part of. And this is where people get lost, especially I think when you read Paul. Paul, I think, understood this in a way that most people who read him did not. In his letter to the Romans, Paul has an extensive set of chapters about the law. And I invite you to read them, but to be very careful when you read them, because Paul is telling us that law controls. Law brings death. Law brings punishment. We are not under the law that brings punishment. We are under the law of spirit, the law of liberation. And Paul is really trying to make this distinction between the two, because when you pass a law in a traditional way of thinking, it has a coercive violence to it. What do I mean by that? Violence is when you take somebody's agency from them. When you say you cannot do this, or laws almost always have a threat, right? You don't speed in your car, or you may get a ticket, or you may lose your license, or we may just take your car away. There's a threat implied in the law, okay? The laws that he's talking about here and how we organize our communities and how we live our lives, we have a series of law that has threat associated with it. Don't do this, or you will be shamed in the eye of the community. Don't do this, or you will be considered an abomination who has to take a mikvah to be cleansed. By the way, mikvahs can cleanse abominations. Abominations really weren't as big of a thing as we try to make them in the modern world. In fact, a woman on her period was in a state of abomination and had to go through a mikveh to be cleansed. So it's literally a ritual bath and it's gone. So don't let people build that up too much in your head, right? But you see, this set of law here is a thing you don't do and a consequence if you do it. The law of the Spirit that Paul is always talking about are positive laws, right? We should be talking well of one another, taking care of one another, living in peace and harmony, and practicing love, against which there is no law. Notice he says that, against which there is no law. That's the revelation Jesus and Paul are trying to get us to, right? When Jesus is asked, what are the greatest commandments? Neither of these is that thou shalt not. That's really powerful and important to understand here. When we're talking about how to live this, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and spirit. Love that is coerced is not love. If I tell you, you have to love, well, you're not really going to love. You're going to protect, right? So there can't be coercion in there. There can't be a force in there. You should love your neighbor as yourself. Also, there can be no coercion in there. If I tell you, you have to love this person, and I'm sure we've all experienced this in our family, especially during the holiday season. Well, you have to love them. That's your aunt, your uncle, your sibling, your cousin. Love is something that is freely given or it's not real. Notice how Christ and later Paul spins this idea around. We're working on active things that we can cultivate and grow within ourselves. There's no coercion in that. If I'm supposed to love my neighbor, then I have to figure out how to have compassion, how to live in this mutuality so that I can have that agape, which is the word that's used in the Greek there, which is more equivalent to our word compassion than love. With that, that's different from telling someone you have to love them or what. If you have to do something, there's always an or what, unless you're working on something within you. That's the change that happens here. And so those who either do not understand or who are so mired in these systems of coercion and control try to turn all of the thou shalt, right? Thou shalt be kind. Thou shalt be merciful into or else. Where are the or else's? What is the or else? But they don't understand a world outside of that coercion. And that's the world we're trying to bring in. No one had to take care of the baby Jesus. Throughout the world, we see what happens when people don't take care of their children. Communities didn't have to band together to ensure that any of these children live. The or else is the child dies. And some people harden their hearts to that and just let it happen. But the radical love and the radical compassion that we are called to in the gospel, where we see this mutual interbeing, this indwelling that we have, this interspirituality that we share with everyone else, invites us into figuring out some way of learning how to do that without the or else. But people really want that or else. And so they start trying to add it back in and smother the child in the cradle. I know that's a rather dark image, but it's what happened to Christianity itself. All of the arguments for love were torn down. Remember, the actual fight that we talk about between Pelagius and Augustine was Pelagius said that through the grace of God, we can learn to grow into better people. And Augustine said, no, you can't. You have to be afraid of punishment or you will never be good.
A fun one to think about this week, mull over in your head. Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers. Jesus didn't say, be a peacemaker and you'll get a blessing. Jesus just said, blessed are the peacemakers.
And that word has a double meaning, by the way. It does mean blessed kind of in the way that we think about blessed, but it also carries with it this meaning of happy or joyful. Joyful are the peacemakers. Happy are the peacemakers. And we don't have a consequence. Just like Brian was saying, there's no consequence after that. There is a blessing that follows, for they shall be called the children of God. How can we put ourselves up like that? How can we resist these models that we grew up in of control and coercion and threats? Have you ever noticed how all of these things are associated with a threat? And it just blew my mind the first time somebody pointed that out to me. And I just went, I never thought about it that way. Well, that's what we're going to be talking about over the next 4 weeks. We're going to be really digging in to this and trying to, through conversation, just work out, what does this mean? What kind of a world do we live in that when somebody says, love one another, they decide to nail them to a tree? I know I kind of cribbed that joke from Douglas Adams there, but the point remains, what kind of a world is that? That's the world that needs to be rejected, that world of fear and corruption. But with what is the world that we're trying to make in its place? What does it look like? What does it mean to live in a world without leaders, where we build outwards, not upward, where we're not talking about hierarchies and those in authority and power and those who are greater, but we're focusing in on the things that really matter and taking care of each other? I would love to know where you all are in the comments. Whether you're listening to this on YouTube, you can leave a comment there. If you're listening to us on podcast, just either go to the YouTube video or go over to CreationsPaths.com and leave it in the comment section there or in the chat. Really would like to know where you all are with this, because we kind of need to start there. Because in the conversations that I have had, I think a lot of us have gotten to this place of we need something different. We can't go forward the way we did before. We have to do something radically different. But to get there, we're going to have to imagine it together. So either over on YouTube or at CreationsPaths.com, let us know what you think. You can also find us on Blue Sky. We're CreationsPaths on Blue Sky as well. I'd love to know, because I think we have some big dreaming to do together. If you're listening to us on YouTube, Spotify, or CreationsPaths.com, you can leave a comment right there. If you're listening to us anywhere else, even if they say you can leave a comment, they don't notify us, so we won't know. But you can leave a comment there anyway, because engagement is magic. And then head over to CreationsPaths.com, click on chat, and you can leave a message there, and we will see it, and we will be able to get back to you. While you're there, if you happen to have a few dollars, you can pass our way. We offer monthly and annual memberships. You can also support us on Patreon and Ko-fi. I am CE Dorset on both, and you can support us using the Cash App hashtag CreationsPaths. Thank you to everybody who does that. We are ever so grateful. Thank you so much. You all really do help us keep the lights on, keep a roof over our head, and food on our table. If we've ever said anything that's helped you out, please share it with others. That helps us out more than you know. And as we're heading out today, O most holy one, the place in which we live, where we recognize God in all things and all things in God, and we experience that mutual indwelling. Open our eyes so that we can see, and our ears so that we can hear, so that we can dream and imagine a better world beyond this need for control and coercion, a world where we can build a life that benefits all people. Help us to find a path to that glorious world to come. Amen.
Amen.